Nierenberg, and I'm president of Food Tank, a research and advocacy organization devoted to highlighting stories of hope and success in food and agriculture systems, both domestically and internationally. It is my sincere pleasure and honor to welcome you to this event on the changing culture of dairy. Over the next hour, you'll hear from experts about the need for regenerative agriculture practices, sustainable packaging, healthy nutrition for youth, and how businesses can be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I want to thank the Clover Sonoma Organic Dairy Company for collaborating with Food Tank on this event. We'll kick off today's discussions with a chat with Marcus Benedetti, the CEO of Clover Sonoma, and then we'll have three very short and dynamic panels with experts. And then we'll close at the end with a summary and more information about Clover Sonoma and their Clover Cares program. In addition to a great group of panelists, we have experts who are watching online. So I ask you all to please ask questions via the Q&A button, and we'll do our best to answer them and also weave them into the dialogue. So Marcus, if I could ask you to join.
Good morning. Great to be with you and all the incredible folks on the list that I saw. Thanks everyone for engaging in this impactful conversation.
Absolutely. Marcus, it's so great to see you again. It's been a long time. I want to thank you so much for all of your support and for being here.
Absolutely. Thrilled. I'm really looking forward to this hour.
Me too. And again, we have such a great group of panelists and a great group of experts watching online. So thanks to all of them again. So Marcus, needless to say, the last 20 months or so have raised a lot of challenges for farmers of all sizes. And conventional dairy farmers have been particularly hard hit because of the pandemic and other sort of outside forces. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how Clover Sonoma's organic dairy farmers have weathered the storm, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for us and hopefully, every other brand out there to try to elevate everything that you do and everything that you touch and get that credit from consumers and pass that along to your farmers. And in our case, all of our constituencies, whether it's our community, certainly our dairy farmers first and foremost, but it's important to fundamentally reconnect those organic dairies back to consumers. And to the extent that we can be a conduit in doing that, they'll fare well because consumers want to reward an ecosystem that they believe in. And, organic dairy, it's not just good enough to be organic,
Right.
You have to meet consumers, expectations holistically in terms of what that means, how the land is being treated, how the animals are being treated, how
Right.
economically those farm families are being treated. I mean, to the extent that we can continue to always push out that narrative and explain why it's important, consumers will reward not just us, but other companies that are doing that same thing in the interest of, taking care of their farmers and all their constituencies.
Absolutely. I think for farms of all sizes, again, it's really important to have that storytelling component so that your consumer can really connect with you.
It's the most important thing that we can do is, peel back all the layers of the onion on that farm and be proud of it. The good, even the optics that, might be hard to explain to an urban consumer. But, our goal is always, if we can bring, a mom's group bus up from the heart of the Bay Area onto a farm, would what they see and the dialogue that they have with our farms comport with what their holistic expectations are of what they're giving their kids. If you can meet that kind of litmus test, then I think you're on your way to something meaningful.
Absolutely. What is hardest to connect to consumers? What is sort of the barrier of them understanding all the challenges and successes that organic dairy farmers you work with are facing?
Yeah, I think our biggest challenge is that, organic's great. It was a landmark set of standards that were put in place for a whole host of amazing reasons, but it's not good enough just to be organic anymore. I think that's our challenge is, how do you kind of completely tell the whole story, whether it's the animal welfare piece, the quality piece, how many generations these, farm families have been on that land. In our case, in many cases, 5 generations up here in the North Bay. So our biggest challenge is not just like, hey, organic product, right? It's these things are meaningful and important for the entire food ecosystem, and you need to be aware of them, consumer, and hopefully once you're aware of them, you'll embrace them and give us and other great brands credit for, kind of fulfilling that obligation.
Absolutely. Do you think from your perspective that consumers, because of the pandemic, are getting all of those connections and really connecting the dots of everything that organic farms and or especially organic dairy farms can do in terms of protecting the environment, protecting workers, protecting animals, et cetera, et cetera?
I think on that front, the pandemic, given, all the challenges that, it's, given the world, in some cases, it's been a benefit because people, they want to seek groundedness. They want to get rooted. They perhaps had more time to do the research that they otherwise wouldn't do in their busy lives. So from our perspective, it in some ways has been helpful in terms of kind of creating that level of education, awareness, right, and something that they can latch onto, that they feel that they can have power and empowerment over. Because let's face it, all of us during the pandemic were trying to get grounded and feel that we had some sense of control over our lives, our family lives. And in this case, at the end of the day, consumers, they always want to feel empowered. They want to feel like, they're your boss. I mean, if any brand is listening out there, to the extent that you can look to consumers as being your boss and respond to their needs, then I think you're doing right.
Absolutely. And I think empowered consumers is such a great term. And what I have seen and what I have sort of heard is that the pandemic has created more of a demand for local and regional products, and especially around animal products. And I'm wondering if that's what you're seeing.
We clearly are, and I don't know, it's both pandemic driven. It's also just look at the supply chain that the world's grappling with. And to the extent that you have a localized integrated supply chain, in our case, local dairy production in the North Bay of California, local processing, local market, consumers embrace that because it's something that they feel that is not fleeting. It's very tangible. It works. It's integrated. It's something that they know is going to be durable for them as they make that investment in that brand and educate themselves in that brand. They want to know that it's also, a reliable supply chain for them.
That's such an interesting word, durable. And I think that, especially in the early days of the pandemic, we felt like our food system was not durable, and it wasn't. There were many cracks, but the more regionalized and localized it is, it can withstand a lot of these global shocks, whether it's a pandemic or the impacts of the climate crisis.
That's right. No, and again, that connectivity that consumers have to understand kind of the vertical integration of their supply chain, knowing that okay, it's going to go from farm to the packager to the local distributor. I mean, those things are meaningful. They are important because as the world is more and more decoupled, the supply chain issues, from my perspective, are going to be not just a short-term challenge that we're in now, but it's going to be a real long-term challenge. Not to say that great for companies that can scale up and supply the world with great products. That's awesome. But there's also a place for regional, kind of diverse, kind of vertically integrated supply chains as well, for sure.
Absolutely. I think we need a mix of both. And again, the pandemic has really illustrated that. One of the things that I think is important to consumers that Clover Sonoma does well is your work around animal welfare. And you were the first U.S. dairy to earn the American Humane Seal of Approval. How does that translate, I guess I'm trying to ask, to consumers rewarding farmers for doing that and all of the other things that we've talked about?
Yeah, it's huge. It all boils down to trust, trust in a brand. And you can't just have one equity in a brand that you trust. In our case, we're agriculture, right? So there's a central casting character in this whole equation, and that's the cow. How is she being treated in this whole process? So every equity that you have, you can't ding that trust in any of those. And organic, like I said, it's great, but consumers are demanding beyond organics. What is that? And in our case, the animal welfare component is huge. Again, we're lucky. Our farms are small. They're out there on rolling hills, green grass. They're getting their muscle tone. They're enjoying the cool Pacific maritime environment and air. And it all goes back to the basic litmus test. If you can bring an urban, shopper that knows nothing about agriculture, bring them to one of your farms and let them see and hear everything, and then walk away. Does that comport with what their expectation was in their mind of what organic dairy should be? Then you've kind of met that threshold and you've maintained that level of trust that in our case took 3 generations to try to build.
Yeah, that connection I think is so key. And that sort of leads me to my next question. Like many companies, Clover Sonoma had to do a lot of pivoting during the pandemic, and I'm sure you're still doing that. But a lot of your pivoting has been around supporting communities and making sure that they're taking care of. Lots of people, as we know, have relied on food banks during this time. Can you talk about Clover Sonoma's Give Back program?
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost, our passion is to elevate dairy, make consumers proud, what you do, how you do it, and then empowering future generations. I mean, we're on this planet for a brief moment in time. What about the next generation? That goes into the whole, what can we do from a climate perspective, whether it's renewable packaging, all those things. And then,
Right.
thirdly, just kind of supporting your community writ large. If your community around you is not strong, you're not strong. From my perspective, it's pretty basic. How can one model prosper? I know it's not a zero-sum game, but how
Sure.
can one model be allowed to prosper without, the greater community being, one of your stakeholders? So, my grandfather started that tradition just under the very basic concept of, if you're lucky enough to be prosperous, you ought to share that. We
Sure.
formalized it and given it some more structure over the years to kind of lump it into those three buckets, but it feels good at the end of the day. It's alive and well. If
Right.
there's more than a couple. I look at myself as a shareholder, but there's 300 people in our operation and 32 dairy partners and a whole group of constituencies that make this model happen and create this, what I always refer to as a Clover experiment. So share it out.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's what, makes me so excited about the work that you do. If only every company could follow that model. And I think you have so much to share with other companies about how to do this well. I'm wondering if you can just end with why you think Clover Sonoma, you mentioned your grandfather, is so uniquely positioned to address these challenges and really help communities.
A couple things, we're family owned. I'm the third generation. Like I said, we've been at it for a while. And so, your P&L tomorrow isn't really what matters. It's what matters in another generation. So you can take those long-term views, you can take those tough stances,
Right.
and you can make mistakes along the way as well. And, I always refer back to the growth hormone RBST. We didn't use it, prove that economic model could work. And it was awesome because it changed an industry, force an industry to not use it. And so I'm hopeful that, like I said, many of these great companies that are joining us this morning are already in the process of kind of upping their game. And so we're hopefully one small model by which others can hopefully replicate. That would be awesome.
That's great. What a great way to end this discussion. Mark, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I can't wait until it happens again. Hopefully it'll be in person, but thank you for your time.
I look forward to that time, and absolutely look forward to the rest of the hour.
Great. Thank you. So now it's my pleasure to turn to panel one with Anthony Meant of Zero Foodprint, Ronald Vevoda, a Clover Sonoma dairy farmer, and Bob Carroll from the California Milk Advisory Board. If you could all join me on camera, that would be great. So I want to thank you all for being here. Ronald, let me start with you. Consumers are hearing a lot of terms that they may not have heard, 10 years ago. And the term regenerative agriculture is one of them. But I don't always think that that consumers always know how farmers are practicing regenerative agriculture. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you raise your cows and how you run your farm.
Yeah. So on our farm, what we do is everything we try to recycle as much as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
So like, for an example is we will pump water out of the ground. We need that to either cool our milk down or water our cows. So like the one that we use to cool our milk down, we'll use it there. And then it actually washes down where our cows are on the cement. And then we'll actually separate all of the cow manure from the water again. And then the liquid manure will be applied to the field as fertilizers. And then the solid manure, we'll actually compost that down and then apply that to the field as a fertilizer in itself. And that's what's really happening is we're taking carbon out of the air and putting it back into the ground as a feedstock for our crops that will actually be growing and feeding back to the cows.
Ronald, this is so different than how conventional dairies often operate.
Yes, some dairies do that, but a lot of dairies or other cropping systems prefer to go out for the cheap fertilizers. And in our organic stance, we can't do that. We've lost that tool in our toolbox. So we had to go out and do this way. And it's actually been extremely beneficial for us. We've seen a lot more microbial activity in our soil and a lot more, in the wintertime, we get a lot of rain here. So we actually see earthworms in a big rain event come up onto the ground.
So interesting. And you mentioned that you lost one tool of artificial fertilizer, but you've gained so many other tools from practicing regenerative ag.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Other things that we'll do is, sorry, we will use those solids as bedding for the cows too. And by doing that, it has gotten us away from other materials that we would need, and actually made us a lot more efficient on a business stance as well.
That's incredible. And I think that's such an important part of this process that, again, consumers don't always understand, but there are all these other benefits that you're providing. You mentioned earthworms. I know your farm and many others also have, increased biodiversity, more birds and beneficial insects come as well.
Yes. So as our cows are out on the pastures grazing, because we do practice rotational grazing. So as we're going through, every day we're out there, and with the earthworms come gophers, come moles. So actually we'll be out there, and the other day I was counting, we had 6 hawks sitting on our fence post, just waiting there. I mean, it's just really cool to see all of those here now. All the geese are starting to show up right now, and they're actually eating some of the crop ground, which what they're doing is they're making it fertilizer for when our cows can go back out there. Because right now, with all the mud and stuff, our cows can't be out there. So they're actually helping us provide fertilizer for when the cows can be out there.
That's so great that agriculture and nature can really help one another. Thank you so much, Bob. If I can turn to you and maybe switch gears a little bit. Ronald is working so hard to produce milk on his farm, but once that milk comes off the farm, it still needs to be packaged. It needs to get to consumers. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, can that be done sustainably? And what is the Milk Advisory Board doing to sort of continue those sustainable efficiencies that Ronald has been so good at describing?
Yeah, Danny, thank you. And it's really because of generations of California dairy farmers like Ronald that over the last 50 years, California has been able to reduce on per gallon of milk, our overall greenhouse gas emissions by 45%. And that's just a great story. But we're working on the next level of the story of packaging, as you brought up. And Clover really is the vanguard of a movement to close the loop in our milk packaging in California. As the first brand to announce post-consumer recycled content in their gallon milk jugs, I see that as the starting point for us to be able to really, ignite the passion to do that more broadly. But we have a problem. We need more recycled milk jugs.
That is a big problem. Can you describe a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, sure. So, we did a study. We partnered with Dairy Management Incorporated, Milk Pep, and brands like Clover and Dairy Farmers of America to really understand from a consumer perspective why we're only recycling. The EPA tells us we're recycling only 29% of our plastic here. And so we dug into this a little bit and found out that consumers, they don't think that their gallon, they don't really even trust that it's going to get recycled. It's important to them. 70% of consumers in California say it's super important to them, but 50% said it was difficult to recycle. And like I mentioned, a third of those don't even trust that it will be recycled.
Wow.
But we learned from recyclers that there's a high value to these gallon milk jugs. They want them. It's worth a lot of money to them. They're going to recycle them. So we launched a campaign. And this campaign is Recycle the Jug. There's a website, recyclethejug.com.
Nice.
We created a logo that brands have partnered with us. There's a video that we actually show, from consumers putting those gallon milk jugs in the recycle bin, it going to the recyclers and through that process, and then on to the end users, including packaging companies making more milk jugs.
Really exciting. And again, sort of like, Ronald's farm and what Marcus is doing, creating these examples that others can follow. That's part of what's really important here, being able to replicate what you all are doing. It is. And it's, we're building on this. It's just starting right now. I mentioned we launched the website. We've started a public relations campaign just recently, did a Spanish version of the website and launching Spanish materials for public relations. An influencer campaign is going to start in the next couple of days. We have a lot of partners, and this has been one of the fun parts of this project, from packaging companies to recyclers to groups like Californians Against Waste, California Resource Recovery Association, and Cal Recycle. They've all been a huge, huge help to us in this project. And MilkPEP, the national organization, is watching. We're committed to measuring the results here. They're committed. They're partners with us on the project in California and ready to roll it national once we can bring some measurable success to the recycling rates here in California. That's fantastic. And again, the website for our recycling is recyclethejug.com, and I hope folks will visit that. Anthony, if I can turn to you right now, from what I'm seeing and hearing, it feels like we're kind of at this pivotal moment, right? Where it's something really critical where things can change. And I'm wondering if you're feeling the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I began as a chef, and at this point, I pretty much identify as a climate crusader. And the reason I'm all in is because regenerative agriculture and healthy soil is so optimistic. We've heard about how Marcus and Clover and Bob are leading and mobilizing the entire industry. So hopefully the next movement will be for the entire industry to follow Ronald's lead and become regenerative and climate positive. We've heard how. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. We've heard how Ronald is, going to great lengths to improve the environment and build healthy soil. And so, that's extremely admirable, but it's not necessarily scalable. Like if the next person wants to do it and the next person, where does the money come from to make these changes? Right. And so, our theory of change in a way is to almost go the other direction and say, imagine if you as a consumer could just send one extra penny to internalize some of those externalities, and systematically help a producer like Ronald build healthy soil and improve water conservation and resilience. We have small fees like recycling redemption on a can of beer or something, right? I still buy the can of beer. At this stage in the climate crisis, we have mega drought and a fire season. It's time for the food economy to incentivize healthy soil. I love that. It's time for the food economy to incentivize healthy soil. How do we do that? You've mentioned before to me the importance of public-private partnerships, but what does that exactly look like? Yeah, so when we started, we were running a restaurant called The Perennial and trying to, tell the story. We were serving bread made from kernza and beef made from marine carbon farming project and, kind of like showcasing these world-saving ingredients. And we started to realize after years that things weren't necessarily changing. So we started a collaboration with the California Department of Food and Ag. And really, they made an analogy to renewable energy that was really exciting for me. Imagine 30 or 50 years ago, like the idea of a whole city being powered by renewable energy. Right. That would have seemed far-fetched back then, and now it almost seems inevitable. And one of the ways that an individual city or county can make that happen is through programs like CCA, Community Choice Aggregation, which basically kind of unlock collective action. So you imagine, you're opting in for the green energy, it's $10 a month, right? Something like that. Nobody had to climb on the roof. Nobody had to, take out a loan to install the solar panels. Like it's pretty streamlined, and it comes down to using money to change the production of energy. And so in this case, Zero Foodprint is sort of working with local governments and conservation experts like the Cooperative Extension, conservation districts, and farmers like Ronald, and great conscientious producers who want to do more, and then great brands like Clover, just to get a few cents per purchase, or really any kind of money to help change how food is grown to restore the climate.
I love it. And I think that's another thing that a lot of folks who are maybe watching or consumers don't understand, that we need investment in these things. We need more capital, because there really is an appetite to change things. And Ronald, if I can, I'd like to go back to you. And, from what you've heard from both Bob and Anthony, these are, you're the one making these changes that they're advocating for on the farm every day. But there's also a really important cultural side of this. Your family has used these kinds of techniques for generations. We think, a lot of people think of regenerative agriculture as something new, but it's actually something very ancient.
Oh yeah. Before we turned organic, Dad started the dairy in 1977. Ever since then, we've been applying compost to the ground. It's been a normal practice. I mean, we had it here. We needed to do something with it, and we have been doing it ever since. So from 77 to 2021, we've always done it. And like you were talking to Marcus earlier with the American Humane thing, that was probably one of the easiest certifications we could have ever got. The only thing that it did to us was add more paperwork to Mom, our secretary. But everything that we were doing was already approved and already there. Why would we want to hurt our animals or do anything? Because it doesn't do anything. It actually decreases our feasibility around here.
No, and I think that's a really great point, that farmers know the right practices. They want to be good stewards of animals and the land, and make sure that this is around for future generations. Ronald, you have a baby who you want maybe to, if they choose to go into farming like you do.
Yes. So the third generation's coming up. My brother has a 8-year-old son, a 5-year-old daughter, and I have a 4-month daughter. And hopefully one day, one of the three, or if my wife and I decide to have more, hopefully one of them will take over the dairy, or multiple of them could take over the dairy.
That's so great. And I think that idea of future generations taking on what you've been doing and increasing the sustainability is really exciting. So I think that's a great point to end on. Thanks to all of you for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We will now turn to panel 2 on empowering future generations. And I'm pleased to have Jose Corona from the Eat, Learn, Play Foundation, Lindsay Waugh from the Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation, and Jen Beretta, a Clover Sonoma farmer. If you can all join me on camera. So Jose, you have a really unique perspective about all of this. You're the son of a farmer, and you're vice president of programs at Eat, Learn, Play. And it was incredibly important during the pandemic, as we heard before from Marcus, to connect farmers to communities. And I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the important work that you've done over the last 20 months.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle, and thanks for having me here. I'll take a step back and talk a little bit about what happened in March of 2020 when we were actually in a board meeting with Stefan and Aisha, and we were talking about the great work that we had ahead of us for 2020 around Eat, Learn, and Play. Mm-hmm. And Aisha asked the question, what's gonna, and we had just started hearing the rumors about COVID coming to the US, and this was in February. So she said, what would happen if schools get closed? What if kids can't go to school? And those kids that depend on school lunch as their only daily meal, what's going to happen to them? And it was at that moment, then obviously March 2020 hit and schools closed, restaurants were shut, business were shut. We decided that we were going to go all in on addressing hunger and food insecurity. So it started with Oakland Unified School District and looking at those 18,000 kids in Oakland that depended on school lunch and school meals for their daily nourishment. And we activated quickly with OUSD providing meals and supporting them. And then we quickly found out that, as it wasn't only the kids, entire families were coming to the food distribution centers. So aside from the 18,000 kids, their entire families were coming to get food. So we had to act quickly and say, how else can we increase the food production or food availability for these kids? And so we started enlisting restaurants, because restaurants were closed, but they had kitchens. So we knew that World Central Kitchen had a model around providing meals using restaurants. So we decided that we wanted to really do the biggest activation in the country and enlisting 132 restaurants that collectively we provided 2.5 million meals from the restaurants, and that provided $25 million in revenue.
I'm sorry, Jose, repeat how many meals that you provided. It's so phenomenal.
Just from the restaurants alone was 2.5 million, which translates to 25 million in revenue for these restaurants that otherwise would have been shut. And then the other thing that we heard right away was that there was small farmers in general, but smaller farmers in the Bay Area that were actually throwing away their food because the supply chain had been broken. So we then partnered with the different partners and said, how do we actually get the food from these small farmers and actually get fresh produce boxes to OUSD families? So we worked with Lineage Logistics, with Salesforce, with Kaiser, with other partners out there to get these the produce that was being grown and local for us, in the Bay Area and Central Valley. Getting that food to the families that in Oakland was super important. So again, big activation there in 2020. And in that effort, we were able to move 5 million pounds of fresh produce from these farmers to these families that actually were really grateful to have it. So all combined in the food security work that we did over the pandemic, we helped work with Alameda County Community Food Bank, World Central Kitchen, and OUSD to provide 17 million meals to local families, 5 million pounds of fresh produce, and activating 132 restaurants. So it was something that we just did by being good listeners and really understanding what the families needed and just figuring out how to connect the dots.
Jose, you made such an important point right there, that being a good listener is such a huge part of this, that you understood that it wasn't just students, school kids who needed these meals, that it was entire families. And then being able to build up sort of that logistics program to source all these foods, to work with local farmers, to work with different companies. I mean, there's so many lessons to be learned there. And if I can turn to you, Lindsay, like Jose, your foundation focuses on nutrition, access, and education. And I'm wondering, and from what you've heard from Jose, what kinds of programs and initiatives have been most impactful for you, not just over the last 20 or 21 months, I've lost count, sorry, but in general, how do we keep these sorts of really creative programs going because they came out of of a pandemic?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first I have to say, Jose, it's so inspiring to hear your story. It gives me goosebumps, and this idea of listening and responding to what the community has in terms of needs, and then how we match that with innovation and with bringing together different resources. It gives us a chance to think outside the box and create what we often talk about is the triple win. There's a way that we can all kind of do our piece. And then just like how the restaurants benefited and the families were fed, right? You can do it on both sides. So from a Sprouts perspective, when the pandemic hit, I'll touch on that and then I'll kind of take a step back to what we do more broadly. But as a funder, what we saw is the opportunity when we knew that programs were shifting quickly. We contacted all of our grant recipients, all of our active partners, and we instantly turned all of our grant funding into unrestricted. Wow. So that gave organizations, we put about $1 million of unrestricted funding to really allow organizations to pivot quickly. So if kids weren't learning in school gardens, but instead those dollars could help feed families, we wanted those organizations to be able to utilize those dollars immediately without having to circle back with us and ask for permission. Likewise, if there was an opportunity to save a job, or fill in some other unexpected way, that was our first priority. So, from a Sprouts perspective, our commitment as a foundation is to meet our community partners where they're at and to say yes as much as we can and to remove barriers and to help them move the needle. So in terms of the programming that we fund, what I would say is that what we find to be most impactful is partnering with those organizations that are working at the community level to really be on the ground with them on the front lines of where they're doing their work, and let them really lead us. They know best where those changes are ready to be made and how we can do them efficiently. And then also to invest in that next generation. Kids can be champions of change.
Absolutely.
When you take kids, and I think we can all shake our heads to this, but you put them out in a school garden, you get their hands in the soil, you get them growing and cooking and tasting their own food. Right. Next thing you know, when it comes to them being that consumer as they grow up, they're going to be committed, right, to making those better choices that are better for the planet and better for people. And so we say, give kids access, knowledge, confidence, and desire, and they can really change the world.
That's great. That's really wonderful. And I think that's a great segue to the work, Jen, you're doing. In addition to being a farmer, you work with 4-H to help that next generation that Lindsay described learn about the ins and outs of agriculture and really how to be better stewards. And what I find really inspiring is that you're not just working with your rural youth, but all kinds of kids who some of whom don't live on farms. And I'm wondering if you can describe why that's important.
So I've been a 4-H dairy leader now for about 4 years. And what's been really neat is not everyone in our group comes from a dairy. And so when you see those kids that are in the group, they want to be involved, you make sure that you either find them a heifer to show, maybe they're just there to learn about dairy, and teach them that they don't have to live on a dairy to be involved in the dairy industry. So not only am I involved in 4-H, but that also goes into my work with young farmers and ranchers and Farm Bureau, because without those programs, without us supporting the 4-H programs, we want to take the leaders out of 4-H, bring them into the next, FFA in high school, and then into your young farmer programs and Farm Bureau to make sure that they're our next generation. And some are in the project just to learn. It's hard in our area in the North Coast with us being organic, because if they want a heifer, their farm or their property has to be certified. So a lot of kids, once the heifer leaves, it can't come back to a dairy. So our dairy and some other dairies in the area let the kids show heifers from their dairy. They come and work with them. They go to the fair, they come back. And so it's a great relationship. And I think that's something that, it's hard to facilitate maybe 5 or 6 kids coming on and off your farm, but that's our next generation. And maybe those are relationships that maybe one day they'll meet a farmer that doesn't have somebody to take over, and they'll be the manager. And now they're taking over a farm that didn't have that next generation. So making sure you're really involved in the youth, supporting the programs, even legislatively, if you think about just the budget and how to make sure that we budget for the UC system, the 4-H kids, that those dollars are huge. And all the support we get from, whether it be a fundraiser that 4-H does and all the industries that come and the businesses that support those fundraisers, that goes back to our youth kids and the next generation.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to how organizations like 4-H and funders like the ones that Lindsay and Jose work for, they're changing, they're evolving, they're learning to listen to what communities need and what communities want. And I think that's so inspiring. So Jen, Lindsay, and Jose, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. It's been really exciting to hear about your work.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now really excited to listen to our next panel on supporting community. I'm joined by Lara Dickinson of the Jedi Collaborative, Christina Ford of Feast, and Gustavo Arellano from the LA Times. So I'm hoping you can all join me on camera. So Dr. Ford, I'm hoping I can start with you. We have talked about this issue of food apartheid and how it impacts underserved communities of color in lots of different ways. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the policies and practices that prevent people, especially kids, who we've been hearing a lot about today, from eating nutritious foods.
It's a big question, but thank you. I think that there are many things that play a part, and we know that poverty is a huge risk factor, a huge social determinant of health that leads to negative outcomes. We know that discrimination and racism also play a huge part. And then you get into issues, I'm here in Los Angeles, of redlining and other issues along those lines. But one of the biggest issues is access and a lack thereof. And that's where we're really proud of the work that we do here at Feast, because we look at the intersection between poverty and food insecurity and diet-related illness and try to foster changes in that regard in a community supportive environment.
What does that mean, a community supportive environment? When we talked about before, we mentioned, that, good nutrition is obviously key in supporting physical health, but it also supports mental health.
Absolutely. And actually, there was an article that came out recently that would surprise nobody's grandmothers, of course, just really espousing the benefits of a nutritious breakfast for mental well-being, particularly in school-age children. So we know that the benefits are there. In terms of the support, no one can do this alone. We have this idea of rugged individualism, but we all need each other and we all need support. And so in our case, what we do is we offer 16-week wellness programs that are 2 hours a week. Participants come the first hour as they enter, they're greeted with a food box, a scholarship filled with healthy, nutritious foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, which we're able to provide through our partnerships with local farmers and distributors. And then they spend an hour learning nutrition education topics. So that's everything from how to read labels and also about the food system. So going back to your first question and how things got to be the way that they are. And the whole point there is to really encourage self-empowerment and self-advocacy in a really organic way. And additionally, people learn a recipe using the foods that we've just provided them. So, when we say access, it's not just about access to the foods themselves, but sometimes people don't know what to do with a certain item. And so we give them that literacy as well. And then the second hour is really, to use the food metaphor, it's really kind of the meat of what we do to a large extent. And that's where we basically sit in a circle, now virtually. And it's the space to talk about all of the stuff that relates to food and food choices that doesn't actually involve what you put into your mouth. So that's the stresses and strains of daily living, traumas that people have been through, relationship issues. It could just be venting about the difficulties of making it to a doctor's appointment. 3 buses, the walk, the this, the that. Right now, we're looking at incredibly high gas prices. That's a huge barrier for people to get to work, to schools, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a place where people can really share those things and do it in a place of support, where you're being uplifted by others going through the same struggles and also learning kind of tips and tricks to make things a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And I want to get into that access to knowledge point in a little bit, but this idea of self-advocacy and really being able to uplift oneself is so important, but all of that really depends on this healthy base of good food and being able to have access to it and to afford it. And so Lara, that leads me to you. So many of us who have attended natural food expos have understood that, the natural foods industry has been notoriously led by white men and women. And the Jedi Collaborative is working to change that. It stands for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. How did it come about? And why did you decide to be a co-founder?
Yeah, thank you. And you're absolutely right. The natural foods industry and food in general has tremendous opportunity to impact far beyond our own industry, to the lives and cultures of consumers, of eaters, and also other companies in our influence. And it is an incredibly white industry. We are white. And that really spoke to me when, as a co-founder and executive director of One Step Closer, we also launched in 2017, I'm the co-founder and launched Climate Collaborative at Climate Day in the natural products industry, which has become a very significant cornerstone of the industry, sort of where there's deep integrity, authenticity, and that's where the intention is really coming into companies. However, when I got up to launch it and present it, one of the big things we talked about was that uplifting education of women and girls, empowerment of them, and uplifting of marginalized communities was the biggest solution to reversing climate change. And I looked around in the room and realized, wow, we are doing so much environmentally now. We really stepped up, and we even had a presentation, a next launch with the Jedi Collaborative last year, where Javan Jones said, "Y'all are doing a great job with the polar bears and the critters and the rainforest," which is key. But you can't hire a single Black person in your company. Come on.
Yeah.
And so we've done, and that really spoke to me when I look around the halls. I just couldn't believe that for the first 20 years of my career in food and natural products, I did not notice how whitewashed the whole industry is, particularly leadership. And so we benchmark the industry. And that is a key part of the Jedi Collaborative, is one of them is to benchmark and then shift basically the complexion and the perspective of the industry over the next 5 years. So currently, the industry is 2% Black in terms of leadership, 6% of leaders are Latinx. About 20% of board seats are occupied by women. And so there's huge opportunity to grow. And to us, that is the single biggest solution for so much, for climate change, for food access, for poverty alleviation, for simply creating jobs. And so we have a whole program and system, and Jedi Collaborative was launched 2 years ago, not as a HR initiative. It is a systems level program that touches and allows companies to shift at every level of their company.
Yeah, these system level changes are so important. And if Dr. Ford, I can turn back to you. We talked about access to knowledge, and for folks to get involved, in any sort of career, whether it's the natural foods industry or whatever, they need to know that that's an opportunity for them. And when we spoke before, you talked to me about how Feast isn't a how-to program, it's a let's do program. And so I'm wondering how Feast is tapping into the knowledge that folks already have, because they have tons of knowledge, but then supporting it with other opportunities.
Sure. So yes, that let's do, or the how we, again, that speaks to that circle and really building upon collective knowledge. We really come from a place that each of the participants has an innate knowledge. They may just not necessarily know how to tap into it, or they may not look at it as an area of expertise. So part of our work is helping them gain a voice in that regard. And some of that just comes from giving them space to share and to speak about their own cultural traditions and things that their mothers and grandmothers and grandparents did. And that in itself becomes empowering.
That lived experience is so important. And Lara, how do we tap into that more with natural products, whether it's Clover Sonoma or the other companies you work with?
That's been one of our biggest areas of inquiry, our biggest challenge, our biggest, I'm looking at myself in the Zoom mirror right now, and I am a white woman who grew up with some privilege. And you start to question, when we launched Jedi Collaborative 2 years ago, 3 weeks before the death of George Floyd, it didn't really occur to us that we shouldn't be the ones in the room making all the decisions, even in launch. And so that's been a big shift in ourselves over the last year and a half that I've been working very hard to make, is looking first at ourselves, and then that ripple impact can fan out in terms of the lived experiences that we bring into the food system. Very hard conversation to have when you have founder driven, deeply committed companies, multi-generational, to have these conversations. So within OSC, it hasn't been easy, and this is a nonprofit I started that doesn't have as much, let's say, financial skin in the game. But what we've really looked to do is model the shifts in ourselves. And so we've modeled that at every level of our organization. You just heard from Jose Corona. I am so honored to have his brilliance on our board. We brought him on board as well as Condon Mason. Started to shift the complexion of our board. We have shifted our membership criterion and created far more access for BIPOC CEOs that may not be as far along in their growth and their revenues, and truly intentionally bringing them into our network. And then we've shifted the team itself. So I am, now definitely not Jedi Collaborative is not majority white anymore in terms of the folks making the decisions, and the brilliance. And I will tell you, what I'm personally seeing is that shift is hard. It's very hard to make that. I am starting to see and appreciate the transformational work we're doing in terms of how we rethink our curriculums, our decisions, how we interact with everybody in our community.
Absolutely.
It's profound.
It absolutely. And that shift is so needed and it must happen. And Gustavo, I'd like to turn to you now. Lara talked about, shifting complexion, the need to, make sure that it's not just white folks making all of these decisions. You're coming at these issues as a journalist and someone who cares so deeply about food culture. And for so long, Latinx foods have been co-opted by white folks. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how that's changing because of young people's incredible work to say, very, dramatically, no, we're not going to allow you to get rich off my culture anymore.
Yeah, because there's been an incredible democratization of what we consider media because of this, frankly. Back in the days, and these days, by the way, were no more than 15, even 20 years ago, even a decade ago, where the gatekeepers of what we considered media were elite, rich, mostly white. And I say this as a member of the James Beard Journalism Committee, in charge of the board. So I am part of what was that power structure. But with young folks, people of color pushing from the bottom up, you are slowly but surely seeing these changes and also, frankly, these institutions. I know there's a lot of institutional folks right here. You have to pay attention to what the young folks are saying because they're making all of us irrelevant. Do we want to be relevant? Of course we do. But if we don't get with the program, we're gonna go the way of Kodak. And Kodak. And this is the thing: when you are part of institutions, you think it's never gonna happen. It's never gonna happen. We're too genius. We're too strong. Big institutions fail bigly.
What does getting with the program look like for us older folks? How can we make sure that we are good at amplifying the work of young folks in the food world and young folks in the media world, and making sure that they're supported by us, that we are in a lot of ways, better allies than we have been.
Don't be allies, be colleagues. Hire, diverse. I get it. It's going to be hard to try to find a CEO with that experience. I do believe in experience, but start that early. I cannot overemphasize the importance of all you folks to go speak to elementary schools, to junior highs, high schools, seed. It starts with seeds. Then you start getting people interested in this. Get them on internships, paid internships, of course. Get them on as fellowships. There's all this money floating around with nonprofits trying to diversify all sorts of institutions. Get that money. And then hopefully at that point, those ideas will start bringing in more of a foundation for you. And then you realize diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not a fad. It's good business. It's good ethics, of course, but it's like, again, you want to secure your future. You got to go with how this country looks like. You got to listen to what the people on the streets are saying, and you got to listen to what people in the classrooms are desiring for themselves.
It is really good business, and it makes sense in so many ways. It's the right thing to do, but economically it will also be profitable. Gustavo, because you always bring me such inspiration, I'm wondering what your advice is to young and up and coming writers, people who want to be, where you're sitting right now with the expertise that you have. What advice would you give them about writing about food in different ways?
Well, first and foremost, get paid for it. And you get paid for it by pitching ideas. Do not be afraid of pitching editors, no matter what publication may be. There's literally only 3 possibilities when you pitch a story idea. They ignore you, which those people are jerks then. They say no, which, hey, all of us get rejected. I just got rejected today by my editor. Or the most terrifying possibility, they say yes, here's your deadline, here's what could pay. What's the worst that can happen? So do not be shy in sharing those stories. And if people do not want to share those, publish your stories, then do your own media. Now with Instagram, now with TikTok, you could be, and when, I hesitate to use the word influencer because a lot of times those influencers, they try to monetize what they do. And I understand it, but that leads into some ethical no-nos for me. But tell those stories of community, and really more than anything, make it more than about you. Find a like-minded community. The best example I could give, a website called LA Taco, which tells the stories of Los Angeles through the lens of food, what is food? Politics, culture, music. A great birria taco, birria de res taco or whatnot. They won the James Beard Emerging Voice Award a couple of years ago. They're making money. They're sustainable all through the community. And that's about as pure a vision as I could see. Another great publication, Tostada magazine, based out of Detroit, also trying to tell the stories. They're not so much about, Latinx communities, although that's important, but all of multicultural Detroit, Muslim, Black voices, Greek voices, all of that stuff. So tell your story, but get with other people to tell the stories of the community that you want to see.
I love it. Be colleagues, not allies. Tell the stories of communities. Food is not just food. It's politics, culture, art, and so many other things. Thank you, Gustavo, for helping us end on a really hopeful note. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of the other panelists as well.
Gracias.
Gracias a usted. It's now my pleasure to welcome Crystal Corson, Clover Sonoma's Chief Revenue Officer, to join me. Crystal, I'm so excited about how the hour has just flown by for me. I didn't get to all the questions I wanted to, but what did you think?
Oh my gosh, it's been such an empowering discussion. There are so many good sound bites that really came out that will really help, I think, not only inform Clover, but inform all of the other people that are listening, whether it be brands or industry or legislation. Some of the things that I really took away, first and foremost from our founder, Marcus Benedetti, the whole line, consumers are our boss.
Right.
And I think, that's really where sort of the industry side and brands really do need to understand that, yes, you've got, your company boss and Marcus is definitely our boss, but what's been so great about working for Clover is it really has been about the consumer, listening to what is that underbelly of what's going on in the food system, and then trying to make sort of change, whether it be around animal welfare, whether it be around empowering future generations, or really supporting our communities. And that's been something that has gotten so uplifted over this last year and a half due to the pandemic. I mean, the stories of hearing from Eat, Learn, Play and, Sprouts and what they've been able to do, or, Feast. And one of the best things about having an arm and a brand that gives back is, we really get to work with each one of these organizations. And I'm proud to say that we support, and, we are truly, one of the things that was said here is let the community experts do the work, right? It doesn't really, I love getting out and getting in and supporting them, but it's the experts who really get those changes that can serve those 17 million meals and that side of it. And so, it's just been such a, it's been life-changing working here and being able to really, do what consumers need and then do the good work. And, for us, it's all been framed up in sort of being a B Corp, which, those types of certifications, right? They are definitely like certs on your label or certs that you get to talk about. But more importantly, they help you create roadmaps each year. One of the things about being in business is you have to go through planning and that side of it. But what's so great about sort of what everybody's been talking about this year is if, again, you leave those consumers, and we all are trying to improve the food system, you get to plan each year and really think about those changes you can make. And that happens to be where we're at right now. So this was the right time and right place for where we're at.
Absolutely. And I just want to reiterate something you said. There are these community experts. They know how to do the work and they want to do the work. What they need is capital and investment. And that's where companies like Clover Sonoma and so many others can come in. Crystal, I'm hoping you can let people know how to apply and get involved with the Clover Cares program.
Yeah, so Clover Cares in a nutshell is a arm where we give back at least 5% of profits every year to nonprofits around elevating dairy, empowering future generations, or supporting the communities. And so it's really simple. All you have to do is go on our website. There's a section for Clover Cares, and then you apply. It's not like a big grant writing thing. It's a, tell us, who you are, why you, are one of those 3 areas, and then what can we do together to help. And then we have a committee that really reviews everything. And we're able to not only fund things through actual money, but because we are a dairy company with perishable product, so often we're able just to give out product, and we pretty much do that to any nonprofit that comes onto our website and is able to figure out how to kind of get it. But it's been, we've actually in this last year and a half, it's been hard to give away money and food because, everything's been so in a disarray. And a lot of the ways that fundraising happens is through these fundraising events. Well, events were closed. And so I see that nonprofits are really having a hard time sort of figuring out. So we've actually gone out and, started looking for ways to kind of give back. And that's how we came across Feast. That's how we've, come across so many of them. So it just go on to cloversonoma.com, click the Clover Cares button and follow the instructions.
Great. Again, that's cloversonoma.com. Thank you so much, Crystal. And thanks to all of our panelists and everyone watching online. This event will be available to watch on foodtank.com and all of our social networks. Thank you all again. I've been really inspired by this last hour and 2 minutes and want to thank all of you. Be well.